Okay, I'm going to go. Uh, One of the things I've been doing as I'm getting farther and farther into this experience is I'm trying to create cliffhangers at the end of each episode, hoping that it will be a keying off point to starting the next episode. At any rate, Aaron helped me last week. He asked me if I regretted not attempting to have an affair with the woman I had described I had met at that political fundraiser. And I said, no, I wasn't ready yet. So part of what I'm going to do today is talk about how one gets ready to have an affair, whatever the hell that means. And it got me thinking a lot about the experiences I've had as a psychologist. I certainly had a number of clients who have shown up in the middle of an affair. I've had worked with troubled marriages where one of the partners had had an affair. And I've liked reading many books about affairs, and I've liked listening to people talk about the management of affairs. So I want to share some ideas about affairs and then make them personal after a while. I'm going to come at this from left field. Uh, I think in an early episode, I said that Jim Bugenthal, when I asked him how to prepare for graduate school, encouraged me to take a lot of anthropology courses if I could. And I did follow his advice. One of the powerful principles I learned about in my first cultural anthropology class was the phenomenon that anthropologists call cultural lag. Cultural lag refers to a phenomenon that takes place in cultures that, for whatever reason, seem to be evolving and transforming at a fairly rapid pace. Maybe circumstances have changed, or technology is starting to make a big difference, or the resources are getting scarce. For whatever reason, cultures are like living organisms, and depending on circumstances, they must evolve, alter, or change, or they are driven to change by circumstances over which they have no control. In our country right now, the pace of change is enormous. The technology revolution is altering everything about how we live and how we do. And climate change is happening at a very rapid pace too. And both of those things are changing enormously how we live, how we relate to each other, and how we conduct our lives. The phenomenon of cultural lag refers to the fact that human beings are not that plastic or not that adaptable. It often takes 2 or 3 generations before the values and beliefs of the culture catches up with what actually is going on in the culture. So my case in point now will be about the question of marriage and fidelity. We are still raising people, even in this generation, to believe, and the pressure is higher on women, that the destination of young adulthood is to find a partner to marry. Marriage is highly esteemed. Anybody who grows up and starts announcing at age 10 or 12 that they never intend to get married is going to be treated as some kind of strange deviant that needs some kind of attention and some kind of help. Little girls grow up thinking that their wedding day is going to be the most transcendent and beautiful day of their life, and it's a party like no other party, and it may even be the best day of their life, and everything after that will be an afterthought, and they are dedicated supposedly to finding a husband. The statistics, however, do not bear out a belief that marriage is a universally desired and desirable destination for the population. The statistics are enormous. The number of people deciding to couple has been dropping steadily over the last several decades. And for the first time in the last census, more Americans were living unpaired than they were living paired. And I have clients who show up, and one of their complaints is they don't feel like getting married, and is there something wrong with them? Well, it's not only the technological revolution. With the change in the economics of our culture, when women were allowed to enter the workplace and we became two worker families rather than single worker families, women were not dependent on men anymore for their survival. make their way and have the economic tools to build independent lives. And that changed the dynamics between men and women. Women don't have to get married anymore. At the turn of the 20th century, there were very few ways women could survive. There were few careers open to women. Teachers, nurses, and librarians were primarily women. They were almost professions reserved for women. And then, of course, there were the wonderful, eternal illegal career of being a prostitute. That was something that women did in large numbers in order to survive economically. But beyond that, the only way to survive was to attach yourself to a male provider and have that person be the one who made the economic means of the family possible. That's no longer true at all. And the race to bring women equal in the workplace with regard to salaries is even going to accentuate the dissolving of that glue that forced men and women to couple with each other. Uh, so the enshrining of marriage as a holy destination in our consciousness doesn't belong there anymore. It's not a holy destination anymore. It's not the only destination at all. The related issue I want to talk about is toleration for and longing for intimacy. All of us struggle with what it means to be very vulnerable and attached to another human being. We are on a continuum. Some of us hunger enormously for human warmth and human connection. As Elo Kelly, who raged at me for wanting to go into independent practice, said when he was talking about marriage, he said there are only two kinds of people. There are those for whom connection, love, warmth, belonging, and intimacy is the prime purpose of their life, and they will walk on hot coals. They will run any risk. They will be disappointed over and over again, and they will come back still searching for in a hungering fashion for that union. And then there are those who want to be safe. They don't want to be hurt. Don't want to be disappointed. They don't want to repeat any of the tragedies of their earlier life. And they prefer solitude and separateness because they're in control of that. Even if they get lonely, they would rather not run the risk of being powerfully attached to any other human being. And most of us are on the continuum, somewhere in between. But it takes a special taste to want to be connected and faithful and have a life partner. It takes not only a taste for it, but it takes enormous forbearance, patience, willingness to do hard work, willingness to show up over and over again, trying to resolve conflicts and differences. As I am fond of saying to my present wife, the one I married 49 years ago wisely, you are my second full-time career. It's very labor intensive to have an effective marriage that remains vibrant over many, many decades. To expect it is probably foolish. And the divorce rate suggests that. I think currently they're at about 56%. 56% of all marriages made wind up dissolving again. So our foolish adherence to the romantic notion that everybody is destined to make and should perform a marriage is temporary insanity based on old stereotypes about what life is about, how people should live. So it's not surprising that infidelity is a frequent occurrence in people's lives. Now, I also thought to myself as I got ready for today, there are a variety. Infidelity is not a one-size thing. There are various kinds of infidelities. I had a call from a former client just this week. The kind of infidelity he is in is really quite tragic, and I've had to work with several couples going through this scenario. He thought he was getting married when he married the woman he's married to. But in reality, he was making an adoption. He was fairly grown up and mature as a human being. She had never had much of any kind of an adolescence. He was, at age 24, he was the first person that she allowed to get close to her. and he was the first person that she explored sexuality with. Her growing up had been slowed down somehow, and she had more work to do to reach the fullness of her adulthood, but she wanted to get married. She was having sex with him, and that was what she was supposed to do, so they got married. And now, 5 years later, as she gets into her late 20s, her adolescence, her adolescent hunger to be not accountable to anybody, to take her life in her own hands, to experiment with a variety of different relationships, has blown up in her. And he now sees what he's contending with. She expects him to be patient and to be at home and to keep the home fires going and watch over their dogs and not need anything from her while she goes out partying with her girlfriends. And as he just discovered, she's having a relationship with another man too. And he's supposed to ignore it and neglect it and be the good father she never had and help her finish growing up by the adventure she's allowing herself to have now. And I think this is a doom scenario, and it often is. If you think you're marrying somebody, but you're really adopting somebody just on the threshold of adulthood, uh, to finish their growing up because you're providing them the space and the time and the kindness they need to be able to do that. And then, if you're lucky, they'll kiss you on the forehead and thank you for having been there and said that they just no longer want to be married. They want to go out and live the life of a single person again. And they leave you, just like kids do when they grow up. They leave home. They say goodbye to their parent or parents, and they go off into the world on their own. If you're unlucky, like he is, they lie and they get angry that you're not putting up with them, and it's stormy. It's a stormy separation that's coming. So that's one form of affair. An affair that represents experimentation that should have been done at a younger age, but hasn't been done, and then explodes. It can explode at 30, 35, 40, even in the mid 40s, affairs like that can start. The second kind of affair, it's more common in men than women, but the second kind of affair is an affair that really represents the true nature of the person. The person has gotten married because the person has always been taught that that's what you're supposed to do. You get married, but the person's never really been married. They've always had one foot on the fire escape. They've always had some action going on the side, either a flirtation or a sexual relation, but intermittently over the course of the lifespan, they need to keep having one after another. And even if they're supposedly in the institution of marriage, they're not living like they're married at all. They're living like they're still in the single world, typically doing it in great secrecy. The third kind of marriage is a marriage of exploration. The person is outgrowing who he or she is. The old adaptations, the old way of being, the old values, the old beliefs are beginning to feel meaningless, not fit anymore, to bind and chafe. And there's a desire to experiment with living differently with somebody else. It seems too scary to start daring to change the marriage relationship. I need to be away from you more. I need to have other pursuits. I don't want to go to church anymore. Whatever it is, uh, to to change in the context of the relationship feels too scary. So the person finds a surrogate. They find a surrogate who will care about them, be their companion, while they experiment with who they're trying to become. And after the experimentation is finished, when they feel comfortable in the new content, the new values, the new ways of acting in the world, then they'll end the relationship and go home and maybe begin to see if it's possible to have some flexibility in the marriage relationship itself. But they do that having explored fully what they like to become before they spring it on the partner. And the fourth kind of marital relation, no, there infidelity. There are two more. The fourth kind is a desire to stabilize an impossible relationship. Uh, that's the one I fell into. you'll hear later what made it so hard for me to leave my first wife, even though everything in me told me it was always going to be painful and never heal. I had made a commitment, as I said before, and there are other reasons I'll bring up later. When I was an adolescent and my father had died, that if I had children, I was never, never, never going to leave them. And so the idea of breaking up a relationship into which children were going to come seemed intolerable to me. I knew I was signing on to a voyage for at least 21 years in length as I started to have children. And I would have to put up somehow with my former wife and not die and not kill her and not leave her. And therefore, I gave myself a license somehow, or found the willingness to say, I can find somebody else and at least have some hours during the week where I can be real with that person, I can be loving with that person. She won't treat me or talk to me like my wife does. And maybe I can find somebody who's similarly situated. She's in a marriage too. And for whatever reason, she can't leave her marriage. And the two of us can be of great comfort and great meaning to each other, even if it's only partial and even if it's only for some hours occasionally. And that's exactly what I wound up doing. But it turned into the fifth kind of marriage, of infidelity. Many people engage in adulterous relationships because they're getting ready to leave and they just don't have the courage to go into emptiness. They want to know that there's somebody there, there's somebody they can be with. If you talk to any divorce attorneys will tell you 70% of the people who show up in their offices that are initiating divorce are already involved with somebody else, or at least they know somebody who's appealing to them, that they're eager to now move on and start exploring what's possible with the person they know that they'd like to start exploring with. So for those of us who are therapists, I hope I've laid out a kind of diagnostic schema about asking yourself, if you're confronted with an affair that's part of the complexity of something you're treating, what kind of affair is this? Because the interventions and the kinds of ways you try and manage it are different depending on which kind of affair it is. All right, I will rest at that point with that topic. Uh, A second thing I had been brooding about and talking about was how my commitment to psychoanalytic techniques as the form of treatment was being shattered by the life experiences I was having in my work with my clients, and how lost I was for a period of time. Uh, I remained quite faithful in many ways to the theory of personality, which I will still insist does not necessarily lead to the theory of treatment. Those are two entirely different bodies of theorizing and paper writing and book writing. And one does not flow easily or sensibly from the other. So I comforted myself. After I made these comments last time, I comforted myself with a memory. I remembered what else I was taking sustenance from. It was a piece of research done by somebody named Fiedler that I had been exposed to in the last year of graduate school. This felt very powerful to me, and it felt freeing for me. Fiedler did some research on the three, quote, theoretic orientations that were in existence in the 1950s and in which therapists were being trained. The behavioral tradition, the client-centered tradition with Rogers, and the psychoanalytic tradition. What he did was he went to graduate programs where people were being trained in these traditions, and he asked 100 students around the country, could they give him a tape recording or a transcript of a typical session that shows how they were attempting to do the work they were being trained to do. It was a good example of work that they felt proud of, that they were learning what they were supposed to learn, and they were implementing it with a client. So they collected 100, he collected 100 transcripts and typescripts and recordings from students. And then he went to people already out in the community, and he got 100 such typescripts or tape recordings from people who had had at least 10 years experience in doing therapy now, full-time therapy. And he then took the data he had collected, and he got judges who understood very well what psychoanalytic theory was, what behavioral theory was, and what client-centered theory was. And he asked the judges to either listen to or read each of these sessions and just put a little letter at the top, which orientation was this particular specimen of work coming from. Now, with regard to the students, the judges could do this at a 90% level of accuracy. The students were turning in sessions they were proud of, and they certainly were representing what they had been taught to do. When he went to the people who had been in the field for 10 years, the judges couldn't make sense out of what they were looking at. They didn't know what the hell the theoretical orientation was of the person who was turning in this work sample. And Fiedler came to the conclusion that the interaction with clients itself is transformative for therapists, that they are influenced by the work they're doing, and whatever they thought they were starting out to do gets subtly modified a little at a time each year as they're out there working with live human beings and trying to be of some help to live human beings. So I was taking great comfort from that as I moved along my own personal journey. I no longer believed I had to know necessarily what I was doing and do it properly. I allowed myself to be more open to simply interacting with my clients, and the journey continued. The other thing that helped me a lot was Helmut Kaiser moved to Los Angeles, California. Helmut Kaiser was an analyst at the Menninger Foundation, which was it was actually a place that there was an analytic institute there in the wilds of Kansas, in Topeka. I don't know. I remember Will Menninger had gone to study for a while with Freud. And when he went back, he decided he wanted to start a psychoanalytic institute at the Menninger Foundation. So there was one there. Kaiser found himself doing his work and feeling increasingly alienated from his colleagues. It was harder and harder for him to believe, same way I did, that the theory of technique was a useful way to go about attempting to aid anybody. And some of his former trainees that he had trained, psychiatric trainees, had moved to Pacific Palisades and were in practice there. They asked him if he'd like to leave the Menninger Foundation and come move to Southern California. And they promised him they would give him enough referrals that he didn't have to worry about earning a living. And he agreed. He gave up his position of managers and moved to Pacific Palisades with his former students. The Los Angeles County Psychological Association, on hearing gossip about this person of some eminence in the field, having moved to our community, led to an invitation for him to come present a paper to us. And he did so, accepted the invitation, and a funny comment. He was one of the shyest people I have ever met. Here he was a therapist, but he was exceptionally shy. He apologized. He said he had just written a paper, and he instead of talking to us about what was in the paper, he thought he wanted to read the paper. So if we would put up with it, could he read it to us? And we nodded yes. Well, he kept his eyes down. He never looked at us, and he looked like he was awkward and uncomfortable, but he read the whole paper to us. And to say the least, it was absolutely mind-blowing. It turned out to be the fourth paper he had ever written. He subsequently published a book soon after called Effective Psychotherapy, and it had the 4 papers he wrote over a lifetime of work, each one of which was he only had 3 published. The first one was written in German before he came to the United States. So his 3 English papers were in that book. And each one was mind-boggling. Uh, and the last one that he read to us was the most mind-boggling of all. It's a play. It wasn't even a paper. It was a play for several characters, and the title of the play was Emergency. And it tells quite a simple but bedeviling story. It's a story of a therapist, and the therapist has had a busy day, and he's getting ready to leave for the evening. He has guests coming for dinner, and he wants to go home and help his wife. And there's a rather elegantly dressed woman sitting in his waiting room as he's trying to close up. And the secretary is usually very reliable. As far as he knew, he was finished for the day. So he didn't know who this person could be. He was going out through the waiting room. He said, "Excuse me, do I know you?" She said, "No, you don't know me." He said, "Are you in the right place? This is Doctor," I forgot what he called himself. "This is Dr. So-and-so's office." She said, "Yes, this is exactly where I want to be." "Oh, do you have an appointment? Did my secretary screw up?" "No, I thought I could catch you at the end of the workday. I have a horrible emergency going on, and I had to see you this evening, and I didn't know any other way to do this than be in your waiting room when you were getting ready to leave." He looked at his watch and he said, "Well, I don't have to be home for another 20 minutes or so, and I live close by. If this is an emergency, please, how can I help you?" She said, "No, no, it's not for me. I don't need the help. My husband needs the help." He said, "Your husband needs the help?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what is the problem with your husband?" And she says, "I think he's about to kill himself. He seems very serious to me. He's showing me where all the papers are, and he's telling me I'll be fine if anything happens to him. And he's been increasingly depressed. I think he's getting ready to do it. I think he's really ready to commit suicide." So our hero says, "Well, I'll come back at the end of the evening after my social event's over. Could I see him at 11 o'clock tonight? Just go home, get in touch with him, tell him I'd be glad to see him." She said, "No, you don't understand. I've been trying to get him to come to therapy for months now, and he keeps refusing. He says nobody could help, nobody can fix what's wrong, and he just doesn't want to come to therapy." And he says, "Well, I don't understand. What's happening to him?" She said, "Well, he's a psychiatrist. He's a therapist too. And he had a young student who was schizophrenic. He started seeing him when the kid was in high school. The kid was hallucinating and non-functional, and he worked with him very steadily and very intensively. And the kid started to get better and better and better. And the kid was able to complete his high school work. He started to date a little bit. He got a part-time job. He got accepted to a university, and he went off to the university. And my husband was feeling very proud. The university's in town, so he was able to continue his work with him and to support him while his life continued to unfold in a much better way. He was getting serious about his girlfriend, and then we took a long and belated vacation this past summer. We had not gone away for an extended period of time in several years, and my husband was tired. He'd been working hard, and I said, "Let's take the month off like they did the Eastern analysts do, and let's go to Europe and travel in Europe for a month." And he said, "Okay." So he talked to the young man among his other clients and told him that he would be gone for a month, but he was leaving Dr. So-and-so in charge while he was gone, just in case the kid felt shaky or needed to talk to somebody. And then he left. And when he came back, we found out that the young man had committed suicide. And my husband believes it was directly connected with his having abandoned the kid. He should have known better. He should not have gone. He should have made different arrangements. He should have had the kid meet with the proposed emergency therapist several times before. He had a whole bunch of things he's supposed to do and failed to do, and therefore he can't forgive himself, and it was on him that the young man had died. And he doesn't want to talk to anybody about it. He just broods about it. And our hero said, "Well, I don't understand. What can I do? If he's not going to come and see me, I don't know how I can be of any help." And she said, "Well, I've been reading the things you published. You have a paper here that says the only necessary thing for therapy to take place is the two people meet. Do you mean that?" I said, "Yeah, usually I mean the things I write." So it doesn't matter in what context they meet. He said, no, all they need to do is start a conversation and change is possible. She said, all right, he won't come to see you, but he's still seeing patients, even though he's miserably depressed. Why don't you call him and make an appointment? Tell him it's an emergency and you need to see him as quickly as possible. And I'm sure if he hasn't killed himself by the time he can give you an appointment, he will talk to you. He will see you. And if he talks to you, you said, if the talk starts, you can make change happen or the possibility for change takes place. So please go treat him while pretending that you're his patient. And our hero is very taken aback by this. He hates duplicity, as you will hear when I talk some more about Kaiser. And here she was asking him to engage in a huge act of duplicity. And then he thought, you know what? I've been feeling irritable and out of sorts at times in the recent weeks. And I haven't been in therapy for about 10 years now. Wouldn't hurt me to go see a therapist. And I think there are things I can legitimately talk to him about as a bridge we could build with each other. I have my own concerns and preoccupations, and maybe he can be helpful to me. So he agreed to see the man. And that was the end of Act One. By the way, this whole play was performed on National Public Radio in the 80s. A group of players actually performed the play. I thought that was wonderful. So in Act Two, the second act of the two acts, he shows up at the new therapist's office. He gets ushered in, and the guy starts doing the ordinary things. He has informed consent forms that have to be gone through. He has family history he wants to talk about. He has a symptom checklist for the guy to go through and address. And as this is unfolding, the hero of the piece says to him, you look like you're kind of going through motions here. You look preoccupied and troubled." And the guy gets irritated and said, "Look, we're not here to talk about me. I need to do this so I can get ready to talk to you about you. This is not about me, this session. This is this is about how I can be of help to you." And our hero says, "I am sorry, we do therapy in a very different way. Slowly, little by little, I've eliminated rules and rituals. You're telling me that you have a certain rule that you like following, that you're not going to talk about yourself, but all the talk is going to be about me. And you know what? That rule's not come to make any sense to me before. Maybe I'm engaged in malpractice. I don't know. I think when we get started, I have other things on my mind that are troubling me. But at some point today, maybe you can educate me. Maybe I've wandered off a good path, and you can educate me about why it's important for you not to tell me anything about yourself." And the guy says, "You're still doing it. You're still talking to me about what my rules are and how I came to my conclusions. You want to hear from me about those kinds of things. And I want to hear about why you're here and what I'm supposed to do for you." And he says, "Well, that's another rule you seem to have that troubles me, and another one I've thrown away. I'm savoring being here. I think what a marvelous experience the psychotherapeutic experience is. This is a sanctuary. This is a space that is safe for me to talk about anything. If some of what's on my mind is about questions I'd like to ask you or interactions I'd like to have with you, I don't want to be scolded or told that I can't do that. I want to be free to talk about whatever occurs to me while I'm here. That seems to be an important principle. I found it very helpful. Maybe we can have a dialogue about why you think it's dangerous and why I think it's helpful. That would be a very interesting conversation with you. He said, "Are you ever going to start?" And the hero says, "Well, I'll tell you, here's where I'd like to start. Maybe you can help me. I have two obsessive thoughts I cannot get rid of. The first thought is, this is going to go on and on and on, and none of it is ever going to matter. And that thought bothers me terribly. And the second thought is, all of this is going to be over so quickly. So quickly it's all going to be over. And that thought bothers me terribly too. And they're almost an antithesis of each other. And yet I'm tormented by both of them. I hear one and then the other starts, or I hear the other and then one of them comes back. And the guy is making notes furiously while he's doing this. And he said, well, this looks like a good stopping point for today. And he said, well, can I come back? And the guy says, I don't know. You have a strange way of doing therapy. And I don't know if we can see each other because you need somebody who would be more attuned to how you're conducting yourself and what you're doing. He said, no, you don't understand. I feel more alive today than I have had all last week. This has been really important to me. I feel engaged with you. I feel something good is happening between the two of us, and I don't want to turn aside from doing that. And the guy thinks, he said, I checked you out. I saw that you had training at the same residency I went to, and you must have had Dr. So-and-so as your prime mentor. And he said, yes, he taught me a lot. And he said, well, you're acting very strangely for somebody who studied with him. And everything in me cries out against doing this, but I will see you a few more times to see if we can arrive at some working understanding with each other. So the guy gets back, and as he's leaving, the guy calls out. The other psychiatrist calls out to him. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm feeling like I'm jumping off a cliff into the unknown, seeing you. And I don't even know why I told you I would see you, but you can come back next week. And that's where the play ends. So I took great comfort from that. My God, if the only thing necessary for therapy to take place is that two people meet and start talking to each other, what a freeing notion that is, and it certainly helped me a lot. All right. Now, what was going on in my personal life in the early to middle 1960s? We discovered after we did, my former wife and I discovered after we had made the decision that I now seemed to have a stable enough income. She was teaching elementary school. She was making money. We would start the process of becoming parents. Oh my God, I get choked up thinking about this. So we started. She threw away her diaphragm. We started having intercourse. We knew enough science that she started taking her temperature and figuring out when she was ovulating, and we would be particularly sure to have intercourse when she was ovulating. And I followed an old wives' tales. After I ejaculated in her, I would lift her feet high in the air so that the semen would settle by gravity deeper into her. And months went by and she was not getting pregnant. And we decided we needed to see a fertility specialist. It was just the dawning of anything called fertility specialist. There wasn't much known about infertility back then yet, not nearly all the wonderful science that exists now. So we got a referral. Her gynecologist gave her a referral to a man who was both researching and consulting on problems in infertility. And then a nightmare started as far as I was concerned. Uh, there was no there was hardly enough spontaneity in our lovemaking anyhow. Now all the spontaneity went out of it. I had to go and jack off several times at the doctor's office. He had a special room that you went and jacked off in, and there were a cabinet full of pornography magazines in it if you needed some help in being able to orgasm. And she started to have gynecological exams and various kinds of hormonal exams. And then nothing turned up that was very persuasive. My sperm count was okay. Her plumbing seemed to be in reasonable order. Now, the next thing we had to do, we had to have intercourse at a certain hour of the day on the day that she was ovulating. And she had to rush over there as soon as I had an orgasm in her. And he had to swab out the contents of her vagina and send some of them to the lab, and the rest he had to look at under a microscope. Very romantic lovemaking that was, with the pressure to get pregnant, and everybody's going to get examined after this happens. Well, after several sessions of doing that, and I should have listened to the universe. We discovered, he discovered that her vaginal secretion, and I didn't get the message. I stuck around. So we asked, well, what can be done about that? He said, it's a hard problem. The best thing he can do is give her, she has to take a douche now just before we have intercourse. So she has to let the douche flow through her and drain out again in the tub. She would wash herself out, and there would be a special chemical in the douche that would stabilize the pH in her vagina and maybe do something about whatever were the chemicals that were killing my sperm. And again, we would do this for the next several months when she was ovulating, and each time she would have to not only get in the tub and give herself a douche before we had intercourse, but she would have to, it would have to be during the day so she could get to the doctor's office when he was there, and she would have to drive breakneck speed there so he could again to swab out and examine the contents of her vagina with my semen. It turned out he could not solve the problem. And after about 9 months, 10 months of trying futilely to do anything about getting pregnant, we started talking about adopting a child. And we decided we would proceed. And we went off to an adoption agency, to Vista Del Mar, and we put in our application. And we were thought of as a wonderful couple to give a child to, because I was a psychologist and she was a school teacher who taught little ones. What a wonderful family to give them. They didn't know what a nightmare my marriage was, and how this, like stupid people, we were hoping that the birth of the baby would gentle us in some ways and bring us a common project that we could love and respond to. So the adoption proceeded, and we were finally given a little boy who was 6 weeks of age. And he had been through the various tests that are given early in life. He was deemed by the pediatrician to be in fine conditions and well worthy of adoption. So we brought him home and we named him Joshua. And I was going to start this relationship with my child in a wonderful fit of selflessness and in kindness to my former wife. I said, the one advantage of adopting is you have no breast milk and he's going to be fed formula. You do not have to get up necessarily in the middle of the night to take his night feedings. Let me be a tough guy. I will take all the night feedings and let you sleep, because you're going to have to take leave from teaching and you're going to be with him all day while I go to work. I'll try and grab a quick nap in the morning and a quick nap when I come home at dinner time. But I'm willing to get whatever sleep I can while he's sleeping and let myself be the one who's interrupted. So we did that, and I would warm the bottle in a pan to just the right temperature and splash it on my wrist to make sure it was just body temperature. And then I would take him and I would hold him and talk to him and look at him. And he was easy to feed and he was not difficult. And he would go back to sleep and I would drag my weary carcass back to sleep. He was on a cycle about every 2.5, 3 hours. So I would get 2.5 or 3 hours of sleep before I'd be interrupted again. And I managed to survive on that. After 6 weeks, I had another experience that I'll never forget. My former wife felt comfortable enough now that maybe I could soothe and take care of the child, that she was going to go and take some time away from him. This is the first time she wasn't going to be in the house constantly while he was there. So she was just going to go to a neighborhood park, take a good book, and take a radio to listen to some classical music while she read. She said she'd be gone for 2 hours and she would be back. And she told me she was leaving him having just fed him and having just changed his diaper. So he would probably be ready to take a nap soon, and I could probably have some quiet time at home while she was gone. This was on a weekend day, so I was home. So off she went. I put him down in the crib and I walked out of the room. He seemed to be nodding off and then he started screaming. So I went back in the room, picked him up, I bounced him around, put him back down again, walked out of the room, and he started screaming. Picked him up, I started to bounce him around, and I said, I better look in his diaper. And I looked in his diaper, and sure enough, he had made another BM. So I said, oh, all right, we'll take care of this. And I took the diaper off him, and he started screaming very loudly, and I was holding him. Back then, we had cloth diapers. And what you did with a cloth diaper is you grabbed it by one end and you slushed it around in the toilet. And then there was a container next by where you stepped on the pedal, opened it, and you threw the wet cloth diaper in the container. And then the guy from the diaper company came once a week. Oh, there was a sanitizing disc in it, so it didn't smell. The guy from the diaper company came once a week, picked up all the cloth diapers, and left you a whole new supply of freshly washed and sterilized cloth diapers. Nothing in the landfills. So I was trying to hold him and comfort him while I was shaking the diaper in the toilet. And I reached to hold the diaper, flush the toilet, and pull the diaper out. But I let go of the diaper accidentally, and the diaper went down into the drain and stopped up the toilet. And now the toilet is running and overflowing, and my child is screaming. And I tried to put a fresh diaper on him. I managed to turn the water off at the foot of the toilet where the spigot is, where you turn the incoming water off. So I stopped much water overflowing into the bathroom. So I put him down on the bathroom counter and I'm putting his diaper on. I managed to stick the diaper pin. I pricked him with a diaper pin. So now he's screaming even louder and I haven't gotten the diaper fastened. I experienced a desire to do the most heinous child abuse I had ever imagined. I wanted to pick him up by his heels and bang his head against the wall until I saw his skull crack and his brains go running down the wall. That's what I wanted to do to him, because then he would shut up and I wouldn't be impotent and overwhelmed and just a terrible state of being. Fortunately, I didn't act on my primitive impulses, but over the years, it's given me a lot of sympathy and empathy for people who commit child abuse. As the old saying goes, nothing is alien to any of us. Whatever human beings are capable to do anywhere in the world, I have visited those landscapes in myself over the years at one time or another, and that was my time of having visited terrible child abuse. So I decided I would take him for a ride, and that helped. He was again sitting up in his car seat. He was on the ride, and he calmed down some. And I actually got home later than my wife did. She was already home, and I told her what had happened. He was inconsolable. And she said, you didn't wait long enough. Sometimes he cries for 2 or 3 minutes and then just drifts off to sleep. The poor kid is probably exhausted. And she took him out of my arms and she put him in his crib and she patted him twice on his back and walked out and he slept for 2 hours. I had been through all of that for absolutely nothing. I had not read his signals properly or responded properly. I kept feeling, I'm the fixer. I kept feeling like there was something I needed to be doing. And what I needed to be doing was to stop doing anything. Oh my God. So I'll get towards another cliffhanger. Uh, we noticed a few things strange about him. He seemed to be having some trouble responding to oral cues, and he seemed to be having some trouble with his gaze. And it took a while, but we found out that he had a very mild hearing loss, not very serious. And he probably was going to need glasses when he got older. That didn't seem serious. And four of his teeth, two and two, in different places in his mouth, were fused together and were like one tooth rather than two, even though they had a kind of indentation between the two of them. And that seemed kind of strange. But he was hitting his landmarks, uh, not very towards the upper part of the range, but a little bit above the lower part of the range. His landmarks were unfolding. He was beginning to turn himself over and then to sit up and then to start crawling. So at 8 months, the adoption was made final. We'd been having home visits from the social worker from the agency during that period of time, and everything was on track. And he legally became our son when he was 8 months old. When he was 13 months old, we began to suspect that he was profoundly disabled. That other landmarks now started showing up outside of normal limits. And he was not making any sounds. He wasn't even beginning to babble. He was not pulling himself up to a standing position or even trying to. I'm sorry, it still hurts. I still feel like I have a harpoon that got shoved in me. And we took him to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician confirmed that he was a developmentally disabled child. How seriously it was unknown. At this point, he would have to get older, and then various kinds of both physical and psychological tests could be given to him to get a better reading of just what we were inheriting. And I could get mystical and say maybe his arrival was meant to be, because it turned out to be a wedge that didn't bring us together. It drove us farther and farther apart. My former wife had her own philosophy of what should be done because he was limited, and I had an entirely different one. Her belief was he should be kept as comfortable as possible. And she did that. She dropped anything that she was doing to go soothe him whenever he wanted attention or soothing. She cooked only the foods that he loved eating. She didn't monitor his diet. By the time he was 7, to go far ahead, he was already suffering from prediabetes, and he was already 30 pounds overweight as a 7-year-old, because she gave him cookies whenever he wanted. She gave him ice cream whenever he wanted. She gave him whatever foods he wanted to eat and whenever he wanted to eat. And she said, he needs to be comforted. He's going to have a hard life. And I said, no, he needs to be challenged. I wanted whatever potentials he had to be talked to and worked with. I wanted him to have speech therapy. I wanted him to have glasses. If necessary, I wanted him to be put in a boarding school at 3 or 4 or 5 years of age, whenever it would be appropriate, because I wanted professionals who knew how to get the best forward out of him, up into him and out of him as possible, even if it meant that we would only be visiting parents and not the parents who were raising him. And she fought me tooth and nail. She would scream at me that you just want to get rid of him, and you can't stand him, and you hate him, and you wish him dead. And she would make all these attributions of her shadow part to me. Oh my God. And that helped end our relationship finally, among many other things. All right, I'm close to being out of time now, and I need to leave some time for my audience to pay attention to me. So I will turn this over to you guys.
Arthur, when you were describing, the need or the situation in terms of having a partner, what I was thinking about in terms of kind of certainly some of the clients that I've had who have been partnerless. and
Mhm.
partnerless, not only in their 20s, but in their 30s and then their 40s and their 50s.
Maybe for the rest of their lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I guess kind of like I'm thinking about these individuals, and I guess how understandable and maybe even acceptable is a life alone. And is a life alone a defensive or deviant position, or is it something that, obviously people embrace or can embrace?
I think it's the latter. I think it is cultural stereotypes that we're struggling with. That's not an honorable or fulfilling way to live. Uh, the person who chooses not to have a life partner has a challenge. I think we wilt if we don't have some kinds of human intimacy. We need some, and some of us need a lot more than others. So they need a dear friend that they can call on, or they need a relative that they're very attached to, who's very, very committed to them and very involved with them, and they can see if in a time of trouble. What is that wonderful song? My present wife played it for me when I came to her after I left my wife. Bridge over troubled water. I think all of us needs a bridge when our water is troubled. So if they can put that together, if they have one or more people who are dear confidants of theirs and very attached to them and very available in times of trouble, they don't ever need to marry.
Okay, I guess it's my turn then.
Okay.
Going back to the bidirectional nature of psychotherapy, is there any particular case that was profound for you, like what you maybe gained from the interchange with one of your clients? I mean, there's probably many. I know a couple of my own, but I imagine that could be an entire video all on its own.
Yeah, that's going to come later. I'm going to start talking much more about memorable cases that I've had.
Hmm.
When you
And
describe,
I can't do the first one that occurs to me because it was fairly early in my practice that I've written about, and there's a chapter in the book I'm working on. It came fairly early, and it changed my life profoundly. But the story is complicated, and I don't want to slight it.
Yeah.
when you describe the play, it reminded me of probably one of the first books that I was told to read as a graduate student, which was in a story called The 50-Minute Hour by
Oh
Lindy.
yes, yeah.
And
I
where,
know the book well. I read it in graduate school too.
but in some ways it's the theme of where the patient has to really change because of the relationship to the therapist and in his attempt to save the therapist.
Yes,
So hence the kind of like, I'm assuming kind of like the point of the play. Is that not right?
yes.
Yeah, as I remember, I read the book, and that was the point exactly, that she was capable of, or he was capable of saving you.
Oh, I'll make another before we bring this to a close, and before I turn it back to you. I want to talk for a second about the two other papers that Helmut Kaiser has in the book. The first one struck me very powerfully. It was, let us stop blaming clients. All of us have some people we're not effective with, and all of us have some people who come for a little while and then quit. All of us have some people who don't want to work with us at all after meeting us or connecting with us. He says that all of us have been taught to find something in them to blame about why we were not able to make the connection. We give them some ugly diagnosis, or we talk about some character trait they had, or say things like they weren't sufficiently motivated. We engage in client blaming, but they are not the responsible ones. We are responsible for doing the therapy and whether the therapy connects or works or not. Now, we should be kind to ourselves. We can't do that perfectly. There's much we still have to learn about how to do it at all. So we're going to fail about 15% of the time. But it does us no good and will lead to no greater wisdom or clarity if we blame the clients for that's why it's happening. That's the first paper. The second paper is he became, like too many other people, he became lost in something he had powerfully discovered, as if that was the only thing that should go on in therapy. What he discovered is what's called expressive style. He never actually commented any longer after he discovered that on the content of the messages that would be given. I had a really terrible evening with my wife last night. He would look at the gestural communication. You seem all hunched over like you're being beaten when you talk to me about that. He would talk about the style in which messages were being delivered and ask the clients to reflect about the style. Is that accurate? Is that metaphor one you can feel and get into? And that was the work he did. And damn it, that was so helpful. And I don't think we teach that. I don't know the style and to work with that. I forget sometimes. I do it once in a while. I remember because, but well, the expressive style has to be very profound for me to notice it. I am a scientific kind of guy, so I'm paying a lot of attention to words and concepts, and I forget to watch the manner in which the message is being delivered. I could improve that way.
Or the tonality of voice, or
That's
the
right.
or the you know, the wiggling of the hands or the feet.
Oh, one of the classic examples he gave was a guy who showed up and said, "Now look, Doc, I want to make sure you don't think anything's wrong with my marriage," with great urgency. Either of you want to say anything further?
I wanted to ask Arthur, in terms of, as you're sort of describing, you know, kind of like the difficulty of your relationship with your first wife, if you know, you were able to conceive a child and it was good and it was you know, great, would that have altered the course of your relationship?
Absolutely. I daydream about that sometimes. And I think that child would have had a hideous problem because I would have idealized the child. I would have turned to the child for my warmth and connectedness. And I would have stayed there. I would not have gone out having an affair or trying to leave that marriage. I might have been there until that child grew up, and the child would be horribly deformed and stunted by the crap of his father.
Hmm.
I think you're wrong, Arthur. I think you still would have got divorced.
Thanks for having belief in me. That means a lot.
I think it would have been a slightly different trajectory, but ultimately I think you would have stayed truer to where you needed to go.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And
Oh,
I guess
great.
on that wonderful note, I will say goodbye for today.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Be well.
I will.
Bye, guys.
Okay.